Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nighat Bajwa and I'm here to introduce and talk about the textbook that I have written for Islamiyat. The textbook was published in 2019 and some of you may be familiar with it because it's being used in some schools, but it's a pleasure to be on a broader forum and introduce it to those who haven't yet had a chance to take a look at it. I wrote my textbook, An Introduction to Islamiyat, History, Beliefs and Practices, specifically to meet the requirements of the Cambridge O-Level and IGCSE syllabuses. I've been working, as you know, with Cambridge for over 24 years, and in my years I've felt that there were very many good textbooks out there, but a lot of them either went and gave too much detail or needed research on the part of teachers and students to complete the requirements of the curriculum. And I felt that there was a need to write a textbook that was specific to the needs of this syllabus and met all the requirements of getting to the higher levels. As I've just mentioned, the text is tailor-made to meet the requirements of the CIE syllabus for both parts of the paper. And it is in there so that teachers don't have to go and find references and other detailed information to add to the text in the textbook, because all that they will need for this syllabus is written in depth, and more information would be beyond the scope of this syllabus. And this is something that I felt strongly about. I felt that the textbook should cover everything that the teachers and the students need. And if they wanted to use other resources, well, that's a good thing, but there is no need to for the purposes of this syllabus. And the topics are tackled in a way that they will be examined in the final exams, which is the goal of the students to attain the best possible results in setting this compulsory component. To go along with the textbook, I've written a revision guide which aids learning and retention and helps them to recall. So I think together the textbook and the revision guide should enable candidates to get to the top levels in their answers. When writing the textbook, I decided to divide it into two parts for the sake of clarity, because I felt that the four units that need to be studied for part one should be all together, and paper two is what part two focuses on, and all the content required for the preparation of paper two is given in part two of the book. Each unit or each chapter of the book begins with an introduction and objective page, which lays out very clearly the content of the chapter being studied, what topics are included, and all the details that the understanding behind it. And in a way, it encapsulates the syllabus, because the requirements of the syllabus are given in the introduction and objectives page, which gives, I think, not just the students, but teachers the clarity of what needs to be taught, what needs to be covered as far as content goes, and what the expectations of the syllabus are. Details and development given in the text enables the students to meet the assessment objectives of the CIE syllabus. The reason why I reference the CIE syllabus and the examination whilst talking about the textbook is that the goal of the textbook was to give them information about Islam within the scope of the syllabus, so that they are able to achieve the highest marks that they can when setting the examination. Coming back to the assessment objectives, AO1 is Assessment Objective 1, which deals with knowledge. what the children or the students know about this subject are being tested, what they can retain and what they can recall in the examinations. AO2 focuses on their understanding, and all questions, which are Part B questions for AO2s, are checking and testing whether they can apply their knowledge in their lives and in the world, in the context of the world around them. The detail and development of the different topics enables the students to get the highest marks in Part A knowledge-based questions, and that detail helps in their understanding of the topic, and if studied well, will be able to help them translate their understanding coherently in the examinations. Let us take a look to see how this has been achieved. If we look at Chapter 1 of Part 1, it deals with the Quranic passages. 15 passages have been selected for special study, and they can be categorized into 3 themes: Allah in Himself, Allah's relationship with the created world, and Allah's messengers. The textbook follows the pattern of how the students are eventually going to be examined. Part A of Chapter 1, the Quranic passages, deals with the main themes of the passages, surahs and ayahs that have been selected. Here, in giving a description of the themes, I have dealt with the context of revelation, the special circumstances that may be surrounding revelation, and I've also given background information for some surahs. So when they were revealed, why they were revealed, their impact is there, and there is a wider understanding, so that when students are writing about the theme of the passage, they are able to discuss it at length and be able to differentiate the theme of that particular surah from one to the other, because otherwise we see that in Part A answers, they're very generic, and many of the candidates speak about the theme of Tawheed, which is not incorrect, because the theme of Tawheed runs through the entire Quran, but there are elements which are specific to each surah or to certain passages, and these need to be brought out. And in the textbook, bearing the level that it's a GCSE O-level examination and the age of the students, the details have been given. For Part B, the importance of the passage in a Muslim's life. How are those passages that they have studied and written the theme of relevant to Muslims today is what is needed. For example, if a student is writing about Surah Qatar, the theme is that it was sent as a consolation to the Prophet when his son passed away, and the Quraysh were mocking him and calling him Abtar, someone with no legacy, and Allah comforts him and tells him how He protects him and how He has given him qatar, or abundance. And in Part 2, in Part B, they need to reflect upon that theme and say that when Muslims are undergoing a hardship, or when they are suffering, or when they are being mocked, or facing any persecution, they must know that Allah's help is not far away, and that Allah has promised His help to the believers. Surah Qatar is specifically referencing the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but the wider message is for all Muslims to not despair and to have faith. And these are the kind of distinctions that are very clearly made to help them answer Part A and Part B questions. Chapter 2 of Part 1 deals with the history and significance of the Quran. And here you have the history and importance of the Quran is given, the revelations of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad, the chronology and the unique features of the Quran are given, how the Quran was compiled, The fundamental themes and the sources of Islamic law are covered. The contents of this chapter are part of question 2, which is a compulsory question, and I've selected one topic from there, which is the fundamental themes of the Quran. And that is because when I used to come for training to Pakistan, I found that teachers find this topic hard to teach. So I thought I would pick on this and discuss it at some length. Now, the Quran, as we know, has several themes. It talks about paradise, water, punishment, life after death, and the 3 themes, and many others, apart from the 3 themes that have been selected for the syllabus, which are Allah and Himself, Allah and the created world, and Allah and His messengers. So the idea of thematic study is that we can broadly focus on them, and instead of looking at what each surah is saying or each passage is saying, we look at what the message of the theme is as a whole. So let us look at the first one, Allah in Himself. From the 15 passages that we have, 5 deal with Allah in Himself, and they are Ayat al-Kursi, Al-Anam, As-Fusilat, Ash-Shura, and Al-Ikhlas. Now, as I've said earlier, the theme of Tawheed runs throughout these 5 passages. Now, if you look at Ayat al-Kursi, the focus of the passage is on Allah's majesty, His knowledge, His power. Al-Anam deals with His ability to create something from nothingness. Surah Fusilat helps one to understand the reality of the universe and how it works. Ash-Shura is a confirmation that the universe belongs to Allah and guidance has been sent by Him, and Surah Al-Ikhlas supports the first pillar of Islam, Tawheed. By looking at the various aspects presented in these surahs, the theme of monotheism can be discussed broadly. Likewise, for the other 2 themes, the 5 passages within each of them have been dealt with as a whole, which will enable students to better understand the theme of these 3 areas of study and respond to any exam question which would be based on them. Chapter 3 of Part 1 deals with the life and importance of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It covers the main events of the Prophet's early life, the early years of Islam in Makkah, and the Prophet's experiences with his opponents. It covers all the topics that are needed to study here: the migrations to Abyssinia, the boycott, the migration to Yathrib, the oppositions that the Prophet and his companions faced, and then the chapter goes on to discuss the main events in Medina, the Prophet's leadership of the community there, the conflicts and battles with the Makkans and others, and finally the chapter concludes with the Prophet's character and the importance of his actions, which covers his treatment of non-Muslims, his dealings with other states, with his treatment and his teachings regarding women, etc. The final chapter of Part 1 deals with the first Islamic community, and I know that this is a very broad area of study, but please do bear in mind that the syllabus is very clear that it is the names and personalities of those who lived with and near the Prophet that need to be studied. And in this regard, it would be the wives of the Prophet, his descendants, including his children and grandchildren, up till Hazrat Imam Hussein, because the other Shia Imams were not there in the lifetime of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. So it is important that students are aware of their names and their importance to Shia Muslims, but detailed biographical accounts of the Shia Imams after Hazrat Imam Hussein is not needed for the purposes of this syllabus. The 10 best companions need to be studied about, and the major scribes. I have selected three scribes who are Zayd ibn Thabit, Ubay ibn Qab, and Abdullah ibn Masud, and written about them. My choice has been based on past papers, what has come, because, just like the Quran is vast, but 15 passages were selected. Not that any one passage is of more importance than the other, but a choice was made. However, the choice hasn't been precisely made by CIE over here, but keeping the pattern in mind, keeping the questions that have come up in past papers, I have included these three scribes and written an account of them in the textbook. Amongst the notable personalities, and let me look over here, I have covered Abu Talib, Hazrat Hamza, Hazrat Abbas, Jafar, Zayd ibn Haritha, Hazrat Bilal, Salman and Farsi, and Muad ibn Jabal, as well as Abu Sufyan. And again, my selection has been based on their relationship with the Prophet, peace be upon him, and their contribution in the growth of Islam, as well as how they're being asked about in past papers. The design and text of the textbook is user-friendly. As you can see, OUP has made the textbook as appealing as possible with photographs, paragraphs, subheadings, so credit goes to them for a well-designed book. We now come to part 2 of the textbook, and here again we have 4 distinct chapters. Chapter 5, which is the first chapter of part 2, has the 20 set hadiths for special study, and these hadiths cover the individual conduct and life in the community. These hadiths are given with the translations in the textbook, and key words from these hadiths have been used to elaborate upon the teachings given in the hadiths and how they should be applied in everyday life. With the 20 set hadiths, students need to know what their teachings are and how they can be implemented in the daily lives of Muslims. And this has been addressed in the textbook with clarity. If you take the example of the first hadith, religion is sincerity, the key word in this hadith is nasiha, and nasiha means sincere advice. And the Prophet's teaching is that Muslims have to be sincere to Allah, His book, His messengers, to the leaders, and to the common people. And the teachings given in the book, in the textbook, go on to say how Muslims need to be sincere to Allah by believing in only Him and not associating partners with Him. How they can be sincere and how they should be sincere to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, by following his sunnah and putting into practice what he has taught us. And they can be sincere to the Quran by reading it daily, implementing the teachings of the Quran, for example. Being sincere to the leaders is to help them in the governance, to not create troubles, unnecessary troubles for them. And being sincere to the common people would signify helping them in the times of need, being having an environment of brotherhood going. So I'm just giving you a sketchy idea, but all elements of the hadith are then dealt with in the answer, bearing the key word nasiha in mind. Likewise, how can the teachings be implemented? We are looking for practical implementations either from the lives of the students, the Prophet, peace be upon him, or the companions. And obviously I have given some modern day examples of how the hadiths can be put into practice by, say, supporting NGOs or funding the tuition fees of an orphan, but examples from the lives of the companions and from the Prophet himself, peace be upon him, has been given to make that distinction between teachings and action, because a lot of times I feel the students in their examination in part B answers tend to repeat the teachings which they've already discussed in part A, or sometimes they haven't discussed those in part A where they should have, and they write about them in part B and they score no marks for it. So by dividing this section into two clear parts of what the teachings are and how they can be enacted upon, I hope that teaching this topic becomes easier, and it is easier for students to understand, retain, and recall them. Chapter 2 of Part 2 deals with the history and importance of hadith. It's again a very important chapter in the textbook because the compulsory question 2 is based on this chapter. This chapter covers all the elements, all the topics that are given for study in the syllabus for this chapter. I've selected one area of this chapter to discuss with you today, just as I discussed the fundamental themes in chapter 2 of part 1. I thought I would discuss hadith compilation for chapter 2 of part 2 with yourselves today. And I feel that if we deal with this area of study chronologically, it will become easier. So the first type of hadith compilation happened in the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And you can see on the slide that I've given you examples of them. The next stage was by the companions, and they were followed by the successors of the companions, the Tabe'un, who compiled their sahufs. These sahufs were passed on from the teachers to their students. And we move on to the next one. Following on from the period of the Tabe'un, we have the Musnaf and Musnad collections. And the successors of the successors developed their hadith compilations based on the ones that had gone on before that time. And I feel dealt with in this particular order gives more clarity and a clearer understanding to both teachers and students on how to approach this area of study. And I hope that you, when you have a chance to look at the textbook and read it in some detail, you will see that this approach works quite effectively in teaching the students. The last two chapters of part 2 deal with the period of the rightly guided Caliphs and the articles and pillars of faith. In the chapter on the rightly guided Caliphs, it is only their time as Caliphs that has been covered. Prior to that, their lives and their contributions have been dealt with in the first Islamic community as companions of the Prophet. But in this chapter on the Caliphates of the 4 rightly guided Caliphs, their accounts of their period as Caliphs, the challenges they faced, the battles they fought, their leadership roles, how they led the community, are all dealt with in great detail. And for the purposes of the syllabus and the examination that the students will take, the amount of information given is more than sufficient. However, if students or teachers want to teach beyond that, and if students want to study or know about a battle or an event in more detail, that is good personal knowledge, but for the sake of the examination, the topic is covered in sufficient detail. Again, you have a page from the textbook which shows you how clearly the design has been laid out with subheadings, key points, timelines, etc. given. The final chapter of the textbook covers the articles of faith and the pillars of faith. Before you is an example of the topics covered in Salah. It's very detailed, as you can see, and likewise Every pillar and every article has been dealt with in great detail, but I would add here that it is very important that students understand keywords like congregation. In my experience, looking at past papers, I feel that many a time students do not understand what congregation is and think that congregational prayers are just and exclusively Jummah prayers. So before we launch into the study of each topic, I would say that it would be very useful for students to know the terms and their meanings. Accompanying the textbook is a revision guide, and it is a companion to the textbook. It covers all the topics that are in the textbook, but briefly, and focuses on the key elements. It is a really useful tool to check what has been studied, understood, and learned. And I think that at the end of every unit or before exams, if students use the revision guides to check their knowledge and their understanding, it would really help them in the recall. What students will be tested on and how they will be tested is clearly given in the revision guide. The topics of the syllabus are summarized in this revision guide for both part 1 and part 2, and questions from past papers set by CIE are at the end of each chapter. The checklist, I think, is a really fun tool to aid learning and recall. The 8 topics for both parts, part 1 and part 2, are then subdivided into themes, and each theme then has bullet points saying what the students should know in that theme for the purposes of knowledge and examination. Here is a sample page from the checklist section. The theme is the first Islamic community, and the first topic in this theme is the Prophet's wives. And students need to be able to identify and write an account of the Prophet's wives, discuss the importance of some wives, including references from the Quran with regards to them. And if they know something, they can tick it off. If they feel that in the checklist that they don't know the details about Hazrat Sauda very well, they can write it down. In the comments, they can say, I know X, Y, and Z on Hazrat Khadija, or I need to know more about the Quranic passages which reference Hazrat Aisha. They could write that, go back. So it can be a useful tool in making notes or writing notes to themselves of what they know, what they need to accomplish, where they're at a certain point in the course. It could be used throughout the course or at the end of the course prior to the exams, but I think it's a useful tool. And I've chosen this page as an example because it had less content to do, but where there is more content, the bullet points drop down and you have more detailed a range of things that students need to do. So I feel this is a tool not just for students but for teachers as well. I've already talked about how the comments box can be used to highlight areas of difficulties, writing short notes or summaries in. So it's really open to how each student wants to use it to make it work for themselves. At the end of the book, I've given a list of command words and phrases that usually come up in questions in the final examination. And the purpose behind doing that was to make the students familiar with them, for them to understand what they really mean, what their requirement is, because many a times it's seen that very good answers are written to certain part questions, but the mark given to that is 0 because the question was misunderstood and irrelevant answer was given simply because the command word or phrase had not been understood. So I think again, I thought of including these to aid students in becoming familiar. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for being here today. And I know these are very difficult times that we are all going through, and I hope that you all stay safe and well along with your families and friends, and our wider community stays safe as well. I would like to thank OUP for publishing my textbook, and I hope that schools and teachers find it a useful addition to the textbooks that are already available. Thank you. The presenter will now take any questions that you may have, and I will do my very best to answer them.